My name is Catherine Brooks. I'm 43 years old, and I want to tell you about the expression on my father's face when he walked into an auditorium expecting a small military ceremony and found 800 people, a full orchestra, and a press section. He sat down in the third row and looked at the program in his hands. He looked at the stage. He looked at the program again. He leaned over to my mother and said something I couldn't hear from where I was standing, but that she described to me afterward as, "I didn't know it was going to be like this. It had always been going to be like this. He just hadn't believed it." I need to start 22 years earlier, in a conversation I have thought about many times in the years since, because the conversation established something between my father and me that neither of us ever fully named, but that was present in every subsequent exchange about my career. My father, William Brooks, had served for 4 years in the Army in his 20s, enlisted, infantry, Vietnam era, though not deployed, honorably discharged at 25 to pursue the civilian career in banking that would define the next 4 decades of his life. He had not disliked the military. He had found it structured and clarifying in the way that military service often is for people in their early 20s, and he had left it without regret when his time was up because civilian life had things that military life did not. He had one specific belief about military careers that he held with complete confidence. The enlisted path and the officer path were fundamentally different experiences, and the officer path was not something his daughter was going to navigate. Not because he thought I was unintelligent, he thought I was very intelligent. Not because he thought I was unambitious, he thought I was extremely ambitious. He thought the military officer corps was a particular kind of institution that ran on a particular kind of currency, the right connections, the right mentors, the right political instincts within a hierarchy that rewarded certain things and did not reward others. And he did not believe, with a specificity I found insulting at 21 but came to understand better at 30, that I had the particular combination of instincts and luck that senior officer rank required. He said, "Catherine, becoming a colonel takes 25 years, the right political relationships, and a degree of luck that I don't think you should count on." I said, "I'm not counting on luck, I'm counting on performance." He said, "Performance is necessary but not sufficient." I watched enough officers in my 4 years to know that the ones who made it were not always the best. They were the ones who knew how to manage relationships as well as they managed their jobs. I said, "I can manage relationships." He said, "I know you can. I'm saying that the kind of relationships that lead to colonel are specific and not entirely within your control." I said, "I'm going in anyway." He said, "I know you are. I'm saying be realistic about where it ends." He said it without cruelty, with the specific concern of a man who had been inside the institution, who had seen the machinery, who believed he was giving me honest information that would help me. He was wrong about the specific things that mattered most. He was right that the path to colonel required 25 years. He was right that relationships mattered. He was wrong in his assessment of which relationships mattered most, and in his belief that what he had observed as an enlisted soldier in the 1970s was predictive of what an officer would experience in a professional military career in the 21st century. He was also, most significantly, wrong about me. I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Signal Corps at 22. The Signal Corps manages the Army's communication and information systems infrastructure. It is a technical branch that rewards the combination of engineering knowledge and leadership ability that I had spent 4 years at West Point developing. I was good at it. Not immediately. The technical learning curve of any military communications specialty is steep, and the learning curve of leadership, which is different from the learning curve of technical knowledge and proceeds on its own timeline, was also in progress. But steadily, and then more than steadily, as the years and the promotions accumulated and the assignments became more demanding and the responsibilities expanded to match, I was promoted to captain at 26, to lieutenant colonel at 36, to colonel at 42, 20 years from commissioning to colonel, 5 years faster than my father's stated timeline. During those 20 years I had commanded twice a signal company as a captain and a signal battalion as a lieutenant colonel, and had served in staff positions of increasing seniority at brigade, division, corps, and joint command levels. I had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and had spent 14 months in a joint command in the Pacific that required the specific combination of technical expertise and interagency coordination that my West Point education and 20 years of career had been building toward. I had also, over those 20 years, developed exactly the kind of professional relationships my father had identified as necessary, not through political calculation, but through the natural accumulation of a career spent doing demanding work alongside people who were doing demanding work, in conditions that reveal character in ways that garrison duty does not. The Colonel Promotion Board convened in February. The results were released in April. I called my parents the evening the results were posted. My father answered the phone. I said, I made the list. He said, Colonel. I said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Colonel. I said, yes, Dad. He said, congratulations. That's yes, congratulations. He said it warmly. I want to be clear about that. He was genuinely pleased. But underneath the warmth was something I recognized, the particular quality of someone who is updating an expectation and is doing it in real time on the phone without having prepared for the update. He said, when is the ceremony? I said, June. I'll send you the details. He said, we'll be there. I said, it's a significant event. I want you to know that going in. He said, of course. I said, Dad, I mean it's a formal ceremony. Dress appropriate for a significant military. He said, right, dress uniform event. I said, for guests, formal civilian dress. He said, we'll be ready. I sent him the details 2 weeks later. The venue, the date and time, the dress code for guests, the parking information, the schedule for the day. What I did not include in the email, because I assumed it was implicit in the information I had provided, was the scale of what he was walking into. The promotion ceremony for a full colonel in the United States Army. It is not the intimate gathering of family and a few colleagues that an enlisted promotion ceremony might be. It is a formal military occasion, organized by the unit and command structure, attended by the officers' professional community, marked by the specific ceremonies and traditions that the Army attaches to this particular milestone. In my case, I was being promoted in my current assignment, which was a senior position at a major Army installation. The promotion was being conducted as part of a broader command event, a combination of my promotion and another ceremony, and the venue was the installation's main auditorium. Capacity, 800 seats. The Signal Corps Regimental Band had been requested. A full military band, the kind that plays at formal Army occasions, with the specific music that accompanies a promotion ceremony of this significance. The press section had been arranged by the installation's Public Affairs Office, which considered the promotion of a female Signal Corps colonel a still underrepresented milestone in a branch that had historically skewed male at senior ranks, a story worth covering. None of this was unusual for the circumstances. All of it was significantly larger than what my father had imagined when he said, we'll be there. I know what he imagined because my mother told me later, what he had said when they were getting ready that morning. He had said, I think it's a smaller thing than Catherine is making it sound. My mother, who had looked at the dress code and the venue name and the parking information and had looked up the auditorium online, had said, I don't think it's smaller. He had said, military ceremonies are usually modest. I've been to a few. My mother had said, your ceremonies were different. He had not revised his expectation. They arrived at the installation 30 minutes early as the instructions requested. They were escorted through the security checkpoint by a soldier who had been stationed there specifically for the ceremony's guests. They were walked to the auditorium entrance where they were met by another soldier who checked their names against the guest list and walked them to their assigned seats. Third row, center section. Reserved. My father sat down and picked up the program. The program was 16 pages. It listed the ceremony order, the participants, the musical selections, the biographical notes for both officers being recognized, the regimental history of the Signal Corps, the attending senior leadership. He looked at the auditorium. It was filling. Not with the handful of people he had prepared for, but with hundreds, officers in dress blues, senior enlisted soldiers, civilian officials, family members, the press section with its cameras and notepads, the band warming up in the pit. He looked at the program again. He leaned over to my mother. She told me later that he said, I didn't know it was going to be like this. She told me, she said, I know. He said, she told me it was significant. My mother said, yes, she did. I was backstage during this. I did not see my father's face in the third row. I saw it afterward when the ceremony had concluded and the receiving line had formed, and I was shaking hands and accepting congratulations from hundreds of people and working my way toward the section where my family was waiting. He was standing when I reached him. Not at attention, civilians do not stand at attention, but straight. With the posture of someone who is in a room that has recalibrated something important and is holding himself accordingly. He took my hand, then, which he had not done since I was approximately 10 years old, he hugged me. He said, Colonel. I said, yes. He said, 800 people. I said, approximately. He said, in a band. I said, the Signal Corps Regimental Band. It's traditional for a colonel's promotion. He said, I didn't know that. I said, I know. He said, Catherine. I said, you wouldn't make colonel. I said, you said it was unlikely. He said, I said to be realistic. What I meant was that I didn't think you would. I said, I know what you meant. He said, I was wrong. I said, yes. He said, I have been wrong about this, specifically and consistently, for 22 years. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. He said, no. I want to be clear that I know what I said. I said the path to colonel required luck that I didn't think you should count on. I said performance was necessary but not sufficient. I said to be realistic about where it ends. I said, I remember. He said, I was wrong about the luck. I was wrong about what sufficient looked like. And I was wrong about where it ends because it hasn't ended. You're a colonel, you have years ahead. I said, yes. He said, what I was actually wrong about was you, not about the military, about you. I sat with that for a moment. I said, what do you mean? He said, I thought I was giving you realistic information about an institution. What I was actually doing was underestimating a person. Those are different things. I said, yes. He said, the institution is what I told you it was. The relationships, the timing, the luck, all of that is real. I said, yes, it is. He said, but you navigated all of it. You built the relationships. You managed the timing. You didn't need the luck because the performance was sufficient after all. I said the performance was necessary and sufficient. He said yes. He said I was wrong. I said yes, you were. He said I'm proud of you. I have been for a long time. I built a ceiling on the pride because I thought there was a ceiling on the career. I said there wasn't. He said I can see that now, in a room with 800 people and a band. That was the conversation in the receiving line. It lasted perhaps 4 minutes because there were many people behind my father waiting to offer their congratulations, and military receiving lines have their own rhythm and momentum that is difficult to interrupt. But it was real, and it was the most direct thing my father had ever said to me about the 22 years of a career he had doubted. We had dinner that evening with the family, my mother and father, my husband, my brother and his wife, and several close friends who had come for the ceremony. It was a good dinner, warm and celebratory in the way of occasions that have been earned over a long time and are being recognized properly. My father gave a toast. I am not going to reproduce the whole of it because it was long and personal and belongs to the family memory of that evening. But there is a part of it I want to include because it captures something that I have thought about many times since. He said, when Catherine told me she was going to West Point, I supported her. When she told me she was going into the Signal Corps, I supported her. And when she told me at 22 that she intended to have a full career as a military officer, I supported her while privately believing that the realistic ceiling was lieutenant colonel on a good day and that the path beyond that was more about luck than about anything she controlled. He paused. He said, I was sitting in the third row today watching 800 people stand when my daughter walked into the room. I was watching a band play for her. I was reading a 16-page program that explained in detail what 22 years of career had actually produced. He said, I owe my daughter an apology for the ceiling I put on her in my own mind, and I owe her a correction of the record. The path to Colonel was not about luck, it was about her. He raised his glass, he said to Colonel Brooks. The table raised their glasses. I raised mine. I looked at my father across the table. He was looking at me with the expression I had not seen since I was young enough that he had not yet built the ceiling, the expression of a father who is simply proud of his daughter without reservation or qualification or the careful management of expectation. I said, thank you, Dad. He said, 22 years late. I said, you're saying it now. He said, yes. I said, that's enough. He said, it's not enough. I said, I know, but it's what we have, and we have time. He said, yes. What happened in the months after the promotion ceremony I want to describe because it matters to the full picture. My father called me the week after the ceremony. Not an unusual call, he called weekly, he always had, but the quality of the call was different. He asked about my new duties, the specific responsibilities that came with the promotion and the new assignment I was moving into. He asked in the way he asked about things he was genuinely trying to understand rather than things he was processing through a framework he had already built. I told him. He asked follow-up questions. Real ones, the kind that show someone has listened to the answer and is building on it rather than waiting for a gap in which to insert their own point. I told him more. At the end of the call he said, I want to understand what Colonel actually means. The responsibilities. Can you explain it over a few calls? I said yes. He said, I'm asking because I realize I've been listening to the summary version for 22 years and I've been evaluating the summary version against expectations that the summary didn't have enough information to test. I said, that's a precise description of the problem. He said, I'm a banker. Precision is what I have. I said, I know. He said, I should have applied it to understanding your career a long time ago. I said yes. He said, better late. I said, better late. He has called every week since the ceremony. The calls are longer than they used to be. He asks different questions than he used to ask. He is in the specific deliberate way of someone who has identified a gap in his understanding and decided to close it, learning what a military career at senior rank actually looks like. He has also, I learned from my mother, been telling people about the ceremony. Not in a performed way, not in the way of someone who's trying to appear proud. In the way of someone who is processing something that genuinely surprised them and is working through the surprise by describing it to people who will help them understand what it means. He told his banking partner. He told his golf partner. He told the neighbor who had been asking about my career for years. My mother told me he described it the same way each time. 800 people, a band. 16-page program. I sat in the third row and didn't know where to look. My father has been a banker for 4 decades. He understands scale. He understands what it means when a room of 800 people assembles for a specific purpose. He understands the difference between a gathering and an event. He walked into an event he had expected to be a gathering, and he sat in the third row and revised 22 years of ceiling in the time it took the band to play the first. I am 43 years old. I am a colonel in the United States Army Signal Corps. I have years of career ahead of me, as my father acknowledged in the receiving line, because colonel is not the end, it is, in a military career that has gone the way mine has, a waypoint. My father does not know where the next waypoint is, neither do I exactly. The Army makes these decisions through processes that are their own, and I will navigate those processes the way I have navigated all the others, with performance, with relationships, with the accumulated expertise of 22 years of work. My father once said, "The path to colonel requires luck that I don't think you should count on." The path to colonel required 20 years of work, 2 commands, 2 combat deployments, 4 years of joint service, and the specific professional relationships that a career built on performance naturally produces. It did not require luck. It required me. He knows that now. He said it in the receiving line in 4 minutes after sitting in the third row for 90 minutes and watching 800 people stand when I walked into the room. The ceiling he built at 20. What is in its place is something more accurate. His daughter, all of her, finally visible. I am 43 years old. I am a colonel. The room had 800 people and a band. He sat in the third row and didn't know where to look. Now he does. He looks at me. That is enough. That has always been enough. We just needed the right room for him to see it clearly. There is something my mother told me about 6 weeks after the ceremony that I did not know had happened, and that changed my understanding of what my father had been carrying during those 22 years. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, not our usual call time, which made me pay attention before she said anything, and she said she wanted to tell me something she had been thinking about since June. She said, "Your father was not at his best that morning." Before this, "I want you to know what happened." I said, "Okay." She said, "He was getting dressed and he was very quiet, not the comfortable quiet, the other kind." I asked him what was wrong. She said he told her. I'm thinking about what I said to her when she was 22. I told her to be realistic about where it ends. I said the path to colonel required luck she shouldn't count on. My mother said she told him, "You were wrong." He said, "I know I was wrong. I'm getting dressed to go to a colonel promotion ceremony. I know I was wrong. What I'm thinking about is what it cost her to hear it." My mother was quiet for a moment before she continued. She said, "He told me he had been thinking about the specific conversation since April, since the promotion board results came out. He said he remembered what he had said in detail. He said he had been carrying it." I said, "Carrying it how?" She said, "The way you carry something you said to someone you love that you wish you hadn't said. Not guilt exactly, something heavier than guilt. The specific weight of knowing you put a ceiling on someone who could see past it and built past it anyway." She said, "He told me he didn't know how to apologize for something like that. He said a simple apology seemed insufficient for 22 years of ceiling." I said, "He apologized in the receiving line." She said, "I know. But I want you to know that what he said in the receiving line was the result of 4 months of working up to it. He had been preparing for that conversation since April." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Why didn't he just call me in April?" She said, "Because he didn't know what to say. And because he thought I think that the ceremony was the right place. That he needed to see it, the 800 people, the band, the program, before he could say it in a way that would mean something." I said he needed the evidence. She said, "Yes, he needed to see what he had been wrong about with his own eyes, not hear about it, see it." I said, "The same thing I needed him to see for 22 years. She said, "Yes." She said, "Rachel, sorry, Catherine, he loves you. He has always loved you, and he has been wrong about your career in a way that he understands now cost you something. Both of those things are true simultaneously." I said, "I know." She said, "He's been in the calls, in the questions he asks, in the way he talks about your work when other people ask about you." I said, "How does he talk about it?" She said, "He says, 'My daughter is a colonel in the United States Army.' He says it the way he says things he is proud of, without the qualification, without the hedge, without the appropriate context that he used to add." She said, "He used to say, 'My daughter is in the military.' Now he says, 'My daughter is a colonel.'" The difference in those 2 sentences is everything. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. The difference in those 2 sentences is everything. My daughter is in the military. My daughter is a colonel. One sentence describes a category, the other describes a person. For 22 years he had been describing a category, the military, the institution, the path he doubted, without fully describing me. Without letting me be a specific person inside the category rather than a product of the category's constraints. June changed that. 800 people and a band changed that. The third row changed that. I have a recording of the ceremony video, a full recording made by the installation's audiovisual team as a matter of standard practice for events of this significance. I have watched it twice since June. Not the whole thing, it is 90 minutes long, but I have watched the moment when I entered the auditorium. You can see the audience rise as I enter, the military members going to attention, the civilians rising in recognition of the moment. 800 people standing in the moment before a word has been said. In the recording, if you know where to look, you can find the third row. You can find my father. He is standing because the room is standing, but his posture is different from the disciplined attention of the military members around him. He is standing the way someone stands when they are absorbing something larger than they prepared for, with the posture of a man who came to a military ceremony and found himself at something else entirely. He is looking at me as I enter. He looks at me for the full minute before I reach the stage. I have watched that minute several times. It is not a minute of pride, not exactly. Pride would be more relaxed, more comfortable, more familiar. What is on his face in that minute is something in the process of being revised, a settled understanding that is actively becoming unsettled, a framework that is being reorganized in real time by something it was not built to accommodate. 22 years of ceiling. 60 seconds to begin to dismantle it. I am 43 years old. I have a recording of the moment my father watched 800 people stand for his daughter. I have a conversation from the receiving line where he said he was wrong about me. I have a phone call from my mother in which she described 4 months of him working up to the apology. I have a father who is, slowly and imperfectly and without the speed I might have wished for, learning to see me without the ceiling. He has been calling every week since June. He asks better questions. He describes me differently to other people. He is doing the work that 22 years of sealing required him to eventually do. That is not enough to account for 22 years. It is what is available. And I have enough years ahead, enough calls, enough conversations, enough opportunities to show him what Colonel looks like from the inside rather than the outside. To build something real on the foundation of September that finally showed him what he had been wrong about. He sat in the third row. He didn't know where to look. He was looking at me. He is still looking. That is enough. That is finally more than enough. One more thing. At the reception after the ceremony, the formal reception that follows a promotion event of this scale, with the regimental punch bowl and the official photographs and the slow unwinding of military ceremony into something warmer and more personal, my father found me near the end of the evening when most of the guests had gone and the event was becoming the aftermath of itself. He said, "I want to ask you something I should have asked 20 years ago." I said, "What?" He said, "Do you love it?" I said, "What?" He said, "The work, the career, not the rank, not the ceremony, not the professional accomplishment. The actual work of being a Signal Corps officer. Do you love it?" I thought about this in the way that I think about questions that deserve a real answer. I said yes, not every day, not every assignment. Some years have been hard in ways that had nothing to do with love. But the work itself, the technical problem solving, the leadership, the specific satisfaction of making a complicated system function correctly under conditions that make it difficult, yes. I love it. He said, "I never asked you that." I said no. He said, "I was so focused on whether the career made sense strategically that I never asked whether it made you happy." I said it did. He said, "I know that now." He said, "Catherine." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm glad you went. Not because of tonight, not because of the rank, because you went somewhere you loved and you built a life in it. That's the only thing that matters, and I was so focused on the ceiling that I missed it for 22 years. I said, "You're seeing it now." He said, "Yes, late, but yes." I said, "Better late." He said, "Considerably better than the alternative." I said, "Yes." He put his hand on my shoulder. The same gesture from the parking lot 22 years earlier, but different now, not the gesture of a man who has said his piece and is closing the conversation, but the gesture of a man who is beginning something and knows it. He said, "Colonel." I said, "Yes." He said, "What comes after, Colonel?" I said, "We'll see." He said, "I'll be there." I said, "I know." He said, "Wherever it is, whatever size room, I'll be there." I said, "I know, Dad. I am 43 years old." The room had 800 people and a band. He sat in the third row and didn't know where to look. Now he does. He's looking at what comes next. So am I, together finally without the ceiling. That is enough. That is everything.